Mr. Robert Middleton, will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
The time has finally come. Robert Middleton is sworn in at 2 minutes before noon on April 12, 2011, to give what will become an enormously consequential deposition from his bed in Shriners, a renowned burns hospital in Galveston, Texas. With the assistance of his mother and sister, the 20-year-old will tell the story of how he ended up here and, ultimately, why he'll die less than 3 weeks from now. For a dozen years, Robert had not been able to tell this story in any official setting, as he suffered through night terrors, delirium, disorientation, hallucinations, frequent operations to manage his lab-grown thin skin, and, in more recent months, a skin cancer that one doctor described as probably the most aggressive he had ever seen in his career. Now in palliative care, having foregone radiation therapy and with nothing left for doctors to do, the terminally ill Robert is going to give a dying declaration about what happened on that afternoon in June 1998 and what precipitated it. It's a story that's not going to be easy to hear, and it's going to be provided not to detectives, but to a lawyer in a civil case. It begins with an 8-year-old Robert Middleton, who was ambushed on his way to meet a friend in The Reckoning.
Let me ask you a question. On your 8th birthday, that would have been June 28th of 1998, did something happen?
It started not any normal day.
I didn't understand that.
It started out as any normal day.
Robert was the kind of kid that started talking about his 8th birthday on his 7th birthday, his mother Colleen recalled in court. We planned to have a little birthday party. I couldn't get a cake until Sunday morning, so just to surprise Robert, I got him dressed and took him to the grocery store and then showed him his cake because he didn't know he was going to get one. And then we went home.
That morning, do you recall what you were doing at all?
I was hanging around the house.
Was that your birthday?
Yeah, 'cause my uncle was coming over, so I didn't want to leave and miss him.
Home for the Middletons was on Crossnoe Drive, a dead-end street in a rural area that sat on the line between Splendora and Cleveland. They moved there 7 years ago, when Robert was about 6 months old.
When you were, before you were 8 years old, before your 8th birthday, did you have friends that you used to hang out with?
Yes.
What kind of things did you do with them?
He just hung around the house, talked, played outside.
Did you ever play any sports when you were a child?
I played basketball.
Yeah? And was that part of a league, a basketball league, or at school?
Cool.
Do you remember the name of the team?
I think it's Wildcats.
The Wildcats are the students of Splendora Elementary, where Robert, the youngest of 3 children, went to school. Robert excelled in academics despite being dyslexic. Colleen said he tested in the top 2% in math in the nation and was preparing to go into the 2nd grade before the Middleton world was turned upside down. The Middletons had the cake party earlier that day, which should have ended with a campout in their backyard, a first for Robert, who was supposed to bring over his new 9-year-old school friend named Alberto. Robert got himself a tent for his birthday to put out on the porch with marshmallows and hot dogs in anticipation. For everyone else, it was just a regular Sunday afternoon. Colleen was inside peeling potatoes and watching a physics show, her daughter and mother helping make dinner, and her husband out working in the yard with Robert. Later that afternoon, Robert came inside and managed to get on the phone with someone from Alberto's house after failing earlier that day to ask his friend if he could come over to the campout. Colleen said after hanging up, he turned toward her with a grin on his face, said he was going to his friend's house now, waved goodbye, and ran out the door.
And where were you going?
I was crossing through the trail to go see another friend.
And the trail that you're talking about, would that be a path through the woods?
Yeah.
Colleen could not keep Robert on a leash. He had already complained about having to be supervised while using firecrackers, and he yearned to have more independence because he felt like he was growing up. And so there he went at around 5 p.m. The call that would upend their lives followed shortly after. Colleen's mom picked up the receiver at around 5:30 p.m. to a man she didn't recognize, telling her to get Robert's father, Bobby, to come to the curve in the road. When Colleen's daughter stepped out, Bobby was already gone. That same man called a second time. Robert was burned, he said. Robbie's no daredevil, Colleen thought to herself, as she assumed he had hurt himself using the fireworks he got for his birthday. But any thought of this being some minor burn was erased by an image she said she had never seen before. Bobby sprinting toward her and telling her to call 911. Bobby had just seen his son's white eyes, skin falling off his body, and a voice. "Daddy, I can't see." "How badly is he burned? Is he on fire?" I don't know, Colleen told the dispatcher, who asked her to give the phone to someone closer to the scene.
When you saw Robert, what went through your mind? What did you, you saw someone you didn't even recognize. Tell me.
Yeah, I seen this truck drive by. I thought they dropped him off just to, cause he come down from the street or something. I didn't recognize it, because most little kids around here, they don't wear shirts or anything. They just run around in shorts. And that's what it looked like with him, and I asked him his name, and he told me his name was Robert.
Chad and Laura Thomason, whose son was a friend of Robert's, had been returning home from a game of bingo when they made the right turn on the Crossno curve. Chad said he first noticed black smoke billowing from the woods near their home, and then Robert coming out of the area where the trail started.
Once you rubbed your eyes and you realized you were on fire, what did you then do?
I tried to get out of the trail, trying to get back home.
Were you running?
I was running as fast as I could. I couldn't really see where I was running to.
Robert was stumbling and barely made it to the other side of the road before he collapsed to the ground. It was really horrific, testified Laura, who said the little boy kept saying he was thirsty. It's horrible. It's not something you ever forgot. He had skin dripping from his fingers, literally. He was burnt really badly. There was nothing of him. It was just black. It's one of them sick feelings that you get, testified Mark Courier, who smelled gasoline on the boy. Mark was on his way to church with his kids when he saw Robert stumbling. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a sixth sense something wasn't right. Colleen arrived shortly after to their neighbor cradling Robert in his arms. I thought, it's over 100 degrees and it's a hot road. Why is he laying on the road, she said. It wasn't making sense that Robert was burned. Robert was a very obedient little child. He never got in any trouble like that. It did not immediately occur to her that someone would have done this deliberately to her boy. But that's exactly what her neighbor insisted happened. So she knelt next to Robert and asked him, "Robert, who did this to you?" And he said, "Rex." On accident or on purpose? On purpose. Why? I don't know, because he was mad.
Billy Joe asked him, says, Robert, who did this to you? He says, I don't know. And then Billy Joe gave him another drink and says, who did this to you? Robert, you need to tell us. And he says, I don't know. And he gave him another drink and then asked him again. And his mom was over there. And he said, Rex did. And then when he heard that, his dad heard it. And his dad went looking for Rex. And that's when the ambulance came and got him.
Donald Smith and Jerry Fair were the paramedics who arrived on scene. They could not believe what they were seeing. In his decades of experience, Donald said he had seen worse burns. On dead people. I have never seen somebody burnt to this extent that was alive and talking. He couldn't even see, the paramedic testified. It was the worst I had ever seen anyone burned and still lived, Jerry said in his own testimony. Despite his condition, Robert was able to tell the paramedics that some kid threw gasoline and set him on fire. Paramedics scooped him up off the asphalt, loaded him on a stretcher, and put him in the back of the ambulance. They draped him in a burn sheet, covered his swollen eyeballs to protect them, and established an IV that delivered pain meds. Before they could close the door, Colleen, who was denied entry into the ambulance, told them that his name is Robert, and today is his 8th birthday. He didn't say anything, Colleen recalled of the paramedics' reaction. He just closed the door, and I thought, that's a bad sign.
What's the next thing that you remember?
Flying over downtown Houston.
Flying over downtown Houston?
In a helicopter.
On the other end of this deposition is Craig Seco. The civil attorney who had worked on other burn cases had been lying in bed thinking about Robert on a Sunday morning in 2011 when everything clicked. Craig, who had adopted a lawsuit filed by the Middletons, thought the theory made perfect sense for why Robert was attacked, and it had nothing to do with stolen fireworks. Less than 4 months earlier, in or around December 2010, Craig had been leaving an El Paso court when he got a call from a friend and fellow co-counsel on other burn cases, a man named Ken Bigham out of Schulenburg. Ken had filed a civil suit in Fayette County on behalf of the Middletons in late summer of 2009, and he needed help. This was kind of routine for Craig, who said most of his firm's work at the time was referred to it by other lawyers. But this lawsuit was different, both in its nature and in its intended result. Personal injury cases normally involve recent incidents in part because of the statute of limitations, and the goal is often to force settlements for the victim without having to go to trial. Ken went to Craig's Corpus Christi office in early 2011 and filled him in on the details of this unusual case. Robert Middleton was burned more than a decade ago, and the government wasn't doing anything about it. Ken, who said he met the Middletons through some friends, brought to Craig's office the lawsuit with some news clippings and witness statements. Before filing it, he was unable to get any information from the Montgomery County Attorney's Office, so the initial goal of the lawsuit was to force discovery of whatever evidence the county gathered in the Middleton investigation, with the ultimate goal of pressuring the government to prosecute the case. No one was expecting to see a dime from it. I was hoping with the civil suit to embarrass Montgomery County in a court of law amongst all their colleagues and friends for not investigating my son's case, Colleen said in court. I wanted to know who was on the trail with him. I was the biggest, loudest, squeakiest wheel ever because I needed to advocate for my son because I felt like nobody else would. Ken didn't know what else to do with the case, so he wanted to know if Craig would help. To be honest, I did it because I could, Craig said about taking up the case on a pro bono or without pay basis. I had been very fortunate in my practice. For Robbie's case, I was not satisfied up to this point how the case had been handled by Montgomery County and the decision not to go forward with a criminal prosecution, he testified. Craig traveled to Galveston shortly after to meet Robert with no idea of the 20-year-old's condition. He was a very sweet young man, boyish to the end, Craig said. He had an incredible spirit. He was really upbeat. I think that people who survive traumatic burns like that, and I have known a few, are all very remarkable people. Very upbeat.
Have you been sad?
Not really.
You try to be happy?
Yeah.
Your mom help with that?
Yeah.
Craig said after discussions with Colleen and Robert, he believed there should be enough evidence even though he didn't know what that was at the time. And time was not something Craig and his team had much of. By this point, and for a dozen years, Robert had been in and out of hospital for operations to cover open wounds and manage the stiff scar tissue from skin grafts that restricted his range of motion. Shriners Hospital was quite literally Robert's second home. He would spend about a month or less at the hospital every year from 1999 to 2008 to manage his condition. The Middletons moved to the city of Lamarck to be closer to the hospital. Robert did everything the doctors told him, accepted that this was who he was, and continued to live as much of a normal life as he could, going to school and hanging out with family and friends. Robbie was a naturally born, responsible person, his mom said. He woke up at 6 a.m. every morning, went to bed at 8 p.m. every night until he was 14 years old. That made my life at the hospital so much easier because at 8 p.m. he would say, "Mama, what time is it?" I would say 8 p.m. He said, "You can go now." Other kids would be screaming, don't leave me," but not mine. Mine was like, "It's 8 p.m., time to go to bed." When it was a school year at 7 o'clock, he would say, "Mama, it's 7 o'clock, I have to do my homework." He made me be responsible because I'm a slacker and procrastinator, but Robbie kept me in line. Colleen described Robert as a sweet, loving, smart, and funny boy who loved animals and wanted to be a wildlife rehabilitator. When his dog died, he cried for a year. When a squirrel was hit by a car, he cried, carried it home, and asked his mom to bury it. And he felt the pain of others at Shriners, she said. He would get upset when a new patient came in. He wanted to know what happened and how he could help. But he was also a fighter who grew up fast. Colleen said he vowed that, after he turned 18, he would be done with surgeries. So in September 2009, Robert, then 19, moved with his family to Salem, Missouri to close this chapter of his life. Robert bought a travel trailer and moved out to the woods, and we lived off the grid for like 2 months, Colleen said. We lived totally in the woods. No cell phone, no TV. But everywhere they went, the summer of '98 followed. In 1999, during a period when he was out of hospital, Robert told his doctors of a non-healing ulcer on his left flank. The ulcer would only become a problem years later, when Colleen noticed that it had grown and was getting bigger every day. The mother panicked, thinking she was the culprit, so she started changing his dressings 5 times a day, but that did nothing. Colleen told a Salem doctor that she believed it was an infection because the wound wouldn't heal, to which the doctor prescribed some antibiotics. It didn't do a thing. So she got an appointment at Mercy Hospital in Springfield, where a biopsy was performed. No, none of the children at Shriners ever get skin cancer, was how Colleen remembers Robert's nurse liaison in Galveston responding to the news of the results of the biopsy. Doctors at Shriners, who are some of the best in the field, didn't believe it either. They asked that Robert come back to Galveston so they could do their own biopsy, which was completed on April 28, 2010.
Can you tell us why we're here?
'Cause I got cancer.
Squamous cell carcinoma is a relatively common skin cancer that often has something to do with the sun. It occurs less often in chronic burn wounds, and rarely as a result of a burn injury in anyone as young as 19 because of the time it takes to develop. Doctors believe that the skin grafts were the culprit, and that Robert was more susceptible to getting it because he was immune suppressed. What sticks out in my mind is the fact that the tumor that Robert had was very aggressive, and it invaded areas very quickly, said Dr. Robert McCauley, who operated on Robert. In fact, it was probably the most aggressive tumor that I had ever seen, and I had spent 2 years with the National Cancer Institute. Robert had the cancer in his left knee, left foot, and more clearly in his left abdomen. Doctors went in for the kill. After the surgery, Colleen said Robert was allowed to go back to Missouri, but fate would have other plans. The cancer had returned with a vengeance. Residual squamous cell carcinoma of the left chest wall was a preoperative diagnosis on January 28, 2011, 6 months after his last cancer excision. He was a resilient, tough kid, Dr. McCauley said of his patient. His attitude never changed very much. We knew that he had cancer, it was invasive, and the cancer was claiming new territory every day. In spite of that, he remained the same in terms of his attitude towards his tumor. Shriners doctors acknowledged they needed to be more aggressive, so that January they removed parts of his ribs and stomach. They thought they got it again, but in reality, they were just playing a game of whack-a-mole with a relentless enemy. There would be a third recurrence, and it was burrowing deeper into his torso at an alarming rate. The third time the cancer emerged, we considered it very aggressive at that point where we could actually see the mitotic process become larger over a period of 2 weeks, Dr. McCauley said. We saw physical changes in Robert's body over the 2 weeks. It was unusual. The doctors were losing hope. They contemplated more surgery, but then noticed that Robert was having GI tract issues and, after consulting studies, found that he had intra-abdominal cancer. The cancer, now deep in his body, was winning. In March 2011, Dr. McCauley gave the Middletons the prognosis: bleak. Surgery was now out of the equation. Robert was too weak for chemotherapy, and so the team would see if radiation therapy was an option, which would not be a cure, but simply pain relief at that point. Robert refused, even after being told that this was the end of the road. He would like to move out of the hospital, back to his parents' house so he can be with his dog and enjoy life a little bit, read an April 2011 outpatient progress note about Robert's disposition. Colleen later disputed this in court. He didn't say he wanted to go home and be with his dog, she testified. They felt like he should go home and be with his family in his final days. And Robert was saying, no, I'm too sick. No, I want to stay in my bed. No, I don't want to go home. But he ended up going home because I said I want my son to myself. I want my son alone with me when he dies. I was being selfish. So we took him back to the apartment, which was right behind the hospital. She said Robert, who couldn't eat and had been vomiting every day in his final days, felt like palliative care was just going to prolong his life, and therefore his suffering. Craig Seco got the news of Robert's terminal diagnosis in March 2011 and was told if his team wanted to get a recorded statement, they needed to come see him as soon as possible before he passed away. The date of this monumental deposition was thereafter set, April 12th, 2011. As his final major act, less than 3 weeks before his death, the boy-turned-young man will muster up the little strength he has to become a posthumous witness at his murder trial 4 years from now. Jimmy Malmay was at home that Sunday evening when he got the call. It was 6:30 p.m. on June 28, 1998, when the off-duty crime scene investigator for the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office was told to get to Crossnoe Drive immediately. Malmay arrived at 7:19 p.m. to take photos and collect evidence, the Texas summer providing enough daylight this late to mop up. Evidence at the scene included Robert's burned clothing, a black hose with a metal fitting on the end, 2 pieces of burned metal believed to be part of a boat fuel gauge assembly with a screw cap, a plastic orange juice jug with unidentified liquid in it, a blue fire-damaged Bic lighter, and 2 cigarette butts and wrappers. Malmay returned the next day to get additional photos, which included of detectives talking to potential witnesses, the area where Robert last lay, which was marked by a puddle and a bag of ice, and about 275 feet down the trail, photos of the very obvious burn area. The burning of Robert Middleton was a national sensation, fueled by news trucks and cameras descending on the little street off the beaten path. The scene was hectic. Immediately after Robert was burned, people in the neighborhood went and did their own investigation through the trail and found the aforementioned items that investigators will only later collect. One of those people out on the trail said he saw a Hispanic boy biking out of the trail toward Crossnoe, eyes wide as saucers. When asked if he knew anything, he said the boy, who looked terrified, just stared back and shook his head. That boy was 9-year-old Alverto, seen here speaking with detectives the day after the burning. Alverto was an immediate suspect because he was supposed to be the one to meet Robert on the trail. The boy said he was walking with his bike from his home on the west side of the trail to meet Robert when he saw some adults and a child coming through from Crossnoe in the east. He said he then exited on the street to see Robert on the asphalt with people around him. His story, that he only saw the aftermath of what happened, remained consistent every time they spoke to him. And this could have been for 2 reasons. 1, it was the truth. Or 2, he had extra time to come up with something. Because the investigation was, by this point, already at a disadvantage. None of the officers on day 1 requested a detective come out to question residents, giving time for stories to be cleaned up and aligned. And even when they were out on day 2, detectives did not interview everyone in the neighborhood. That was in part chalked up to the fact that the scene was hectic and some in the vicinity on the day of the burning weren't sure who witnessed what. That did not explain why there wasn't a survey of every dwelling in the neighborhood. It also didn't help that neighbors gradually began shying away from investigator questions to stop the police-chasing media from camping out on their yards. Lead Detective Bruce Zener, who had been a detective for less than 2 years at that point, will later acknowledge that there was no funding or manpower shortage at the time to explain the early gaffes, which will only get worse. In the meantime, the detectives had targets. Beside Alverto, the real obvious one was 13-year-old Rex, the boy identified by Robert as the one who allegedly did it. Initially, when the detectives got to the house, they were turned away by Rex's mother, who said the child would not speak without a lawyer. Eventually, Rex, who lived on the north side of the trail, would give a story. On the morning of the incident, he was at the home of the Scoggins family working with their kids on a pickup truck. They finished at around noon and decided later that afternoon to go for a swim at a river approximately 5 miles or roughly 10 minutes from the neighborhood. One of the teens in the group testified that when he left his house to meet up with them after supper, he saw Robert and his brother out in the Middleton driveway. He said he took note that it was 4:54 p.m. when they left in the pickup to go swimming, arriving at around 5:15 or 5:20 p.m. Minutes later, the swim group heard honking and shouting. The mom of one of the boys pulled up and was demanding that they get back to Crossnoe. She informed them that Robert had been burned, and he was pointing the finger at Rex.
What did you think when you saw him?
When I saw him, everybody else was thinking that he did it by himself, but I knew somebody had to do it, and I seen that little kid out there on the trail when I ran out there. And the thing about Rex, I think that's true, because Rex, was supposed to be going swimming, and before he went swimming, it was around 4 or something when it happened. He went swimming around 5, and it gave him about 30-35 minutes to do it, and it took Robert about 15 minutes to get out of the trail to the ditch.
This Fox 26 interview was conducted 2 days later with Donald Collins, who was the first person to alert the Scoggin family to the horror. Angela Scoggin and her mom were inside cooking when they heard frantic knocking on their door. When they opened, they saw Donald, having just gotten off his bike, shouting, "Where is Rex? Where's Rex?" "Why do you want to know where Rex is? He's gone swimming," Angela recalls telling the 13-year-old. "Rex just fried Robbie," he allegedly told her. "He just said he was tied to a tree and set on fire, and I have to find Rex," Angela recalls.
What do you know about this? Without saying the other kid's name, the kid who did this, what do you know about him? Tell me about him.
He's about 5 foot and has blondish hair, and he's skinny and always wears Nikes and stuff. He dips and he walks around acting bad and stuff all the time.
How does he act bad?
He just goes around trying to pick on little kids.
Is he kind of a neighborhood bully?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
He I used to hang out with him and stuff. I watched him. Like when Robert or something, or one little kid would come over, they'd be on the back or something, they'd be riding down the road. He'd come up to him and stop him, push him off the back, take the back and start riding down the road on it. And about a day or two later, I seen him do it again, and I told him, I said, "Hey, you need to stop that." And I got Robert's bike back, and Robert come on home, and he got mad at me, and he wanted to fight me. I told him that he don't want to. So he ran up to his house, and he ain't been out since this happened.
"Oh my God, come help, Robbie's hair is on fire," Donald shouted inside his home, according to a statement taken years later from a relative. When the family stepped outside, they saw Robert in flames coming out of the trail, yelling for help and asking for his mama. The Scoggins provided statements saying there could be no way Rex was involved because he wasn't out of their sight for any significant amount of time for much of that day. Rex testified that he was confused about being blamed and had nothing to say to reporters who came to try to speak with him. The family members, in fact, had to put towels over their heads to avoid cameras, according to one witness. Meanwhile, detectives spoke to Robert's brother and sister and tried their father in the afternoon, but he was too shaken to write out a statement. Bobby had come back to the house to get some clothes. The next time he'll visit will be to move out of the house, which was next to the compound where Donald Collins lived. Donald and his guardian John had been standing out on the street when detectives approached them for a second time, which will be the final interview for the night. One of the tenants on the compound earlier that day introduced Donald as the first person to see Robert come out of the trail. At some point during the brief chat, Donald said that he found a piece of clothing at the scene that he picked up and kept at his house. He did not explain why he kept it and was asked to retrieve it. Moments later, the teen stepped out with a plastic bag that contained a piece of burned boxers with green skulls on them, which is what Robert wore that day. Detective Zener would later say that it was somewhat strange that he would keep it. Stranger still were the interviews Donald was giving to media.
Do you have nightmares or anything? That would give me nightmares.
I had one, and since then I ain't slept. I'm lucky I slept last night. Yeah, I have had nightmares over it and stuff.
What have you seen in your nightmares?
Just see Robert and stuff, and just having backlashes in my mind of how it happened and stuff, and me seeing him and stuff, how it was.
He was saying things that piqued investigator interest. How it happened and stuff. That it took Robert 15 minutes to get out of the trail, and that the 8-year-old had fallen 4 times coming out of it. Detective Zener caught the latter claim on a 10 p.m. news hit about 3 hours after their short conversation. His colleague was blowing up his phone after the news segment. They both agreed. Donald Collins was implicating himself. With the 13-year-old now in the crosshairs and believing that they had spoken to everyone they needed to in the neighborhood, detectives now needed to get statements from the Middleton inner circle to confirm their suspicion. Wednesday, July 1st was the first day detectives visited Shriners Hospital, where they were greeted by Colleen. In her statement, she told them she did not believe Rex did it because her son did not associate with him at all. She also told them that after Robert outed Rex, she got up and was turning around when she almost tripped over Donald, who had been leaning over her with a grin on his face. Bobby also noted something of significance. Earlier on the day of the burning, Donald had been at the dividing fence when his son confided in his dad that the big boy took his smoke bombs, which Robert liked to tie to his bike as he rode around the neighborhood. When confronted, Donald reached into his pocket and handed them over, after which a shouting match between the children ensued as they retreated to their homes. Detectives now had a possible motive for the prime suspect. All they needed to do now was talk to the victim. The charge nurse instructed the detectives to wear gowns, masks, and rubber gloves before entering the room to protect Robert, who was fresh from a major operation. Upon entering the room, Detective Zener said he saw Robert wrapped in gauze and on a respirator, more or less suspended because he could not lay flat. He said it was the single most enduring image in his head during the investigation. The detectives, who were working against the clock to get a statement from what looked like a dying child, were told by doctors that it was probably not a good idea to try to get one now because of Robert's condition, and the fact that he was heavily medicated and had no sense of self or awareness of what was going on around him. They accepted the advice and, instead, left a note with Colleen to alert them when Robert was able to speak, and what precisely to ask him. The next day, July 2nd, detectives and the county attorney met in the sheriff's office conference room to discuss next steps. During that meeting, the office's public information officer forwarded a note from Colleen to Detective Zener. Doctors removed Robert's respirator, and he was able to speak. At her earliest opportunity and in the presence of 2 nurses, Colleen asked the question, "Did Dawn do this to you?" And he answered, "Yes."
And as you were going through the woods to see the little boy, can you tell us what happened?
I got like halfway through it, and Don grabbed on my grass and turned me around and threw the grass in my face.
Okay, and I want to say this again. So what you said was Don grabbed you, turned you around, and threw gas in your face?
"Your son is going to die," Dr. Manu Desai told Colleen and her husband on the 2nd floor of Shriners Hospital on the night of the incident. "Has anybody ever survived this?" Colleen asked. "No one ever in the history of the world has ever survived being burned as bad as Robert was burned," he said. "I believe Dr. Desai because they were the experts," Colleen said in court. "He's going to die. He's going to die. 1 minute, he's perfectly fine. And the next thing, he's going to die." Colleen recalled when she first saw Robert after being admitted, he was swollen and bandaged. His front teeth, a little crooked, were there before they were removed so they didn't fall into his lungs during surgery. "I was standing behind his bed thinking, he's going to die, and this is my son. He looked nothing like Robert. I kept telling myself, this is Robert. This is Robert." Robert had burns over 99% of his body, most of which were 3rd degree, save for a tiny, coin-sized spot underneath his left foot, which was completely spared.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Herndon.
The chances of living in 1998 when he was burned from that size burn were very, very small, Dr. David Herndon, a renowned burn surgeon, said in 2015 testimony. The doctor ranked the boy's burns at the very top of the severity and said it was easily one of the worst he'd ever seen. He said in his experience, hundreds have survived with burn coverage of over 80%, but only about 10 did with burns over 98. They were going to make another miracle out of Robert. The doctors received a boy who was very cold, in shock, and had an elevated heart rate. The burns went so deep into his body, through fat and muscle, that fluid was leaking out, which caused his blood pressure to drop. They replaced the fluid via large tubes running through his arteries and veins just to keep him alive, had a continuous line of morphine to manage the pain, and put him on a ventilator because he was struggling to breathe. He lost his left ear and his eyelids. His eyes would later grow bacteria and perforate, requiring cornea and eyelid grafts, which would allow him to regain his sight after multiple operations. They also ran tubes into his mouth to feed him and drain his stomach. Skin that suffers third-degree burns never heals, meaning Robert was left with dead tissue across most of his body. This was bad because dead tissue, known as gangrene, can within a week start to grow bacteria on the surface that will eventually make its way into the body, causing a fatal infection. So the first order of business on night 1 was to remove this tissue. The next day, doctors prepared skin from a bank that warehoused frozen donor skin to temporarily staple over his body. Temporarily, because the body will eventually find out about this invading cadaver skin and reject it. Fortunately, they had that small amount of good skin left under his left foot that will be taken to a lab in Boston to grow and then graft over much of his body. This relatively new procedure was being outsourced to a biotech firm called Genzyme. According to testimony, by the time Robert was a subject of this novel technique, only about 5 to 10 patients had gone through it, with burns as big as the boy from Houston. The first batch of cultured skin would take 3 weeks to arrive, so the hope was that Robert's suppressed immune system, which was overworked and therefore overwhelmed, would not immediately attack the cadaver skin, which would need to be replaced regularly. During that period, doctors also waited for the second-degree burn skin on the top of his head and on his legs to regrow and then shave those once a week and spread that tissue out like what one doctor analogized as a woman's fishnet stocking. That mesh would contribute to about 20 to 30% of coverage. The rest of the skin would come from the lab and be completed through a series of operations totaling between 200 and 300, which also involved removing fat, leaving him with mostly bone and some very weak muscle. The lab skin didn't have sweat or hair glands, and it was paper thin, almost see-through, considering they only had that tiny piece of good skin to cover most of his body. The lack of skin thickness meant scars formed underneath when it healed. According to Dr. Herndon, when scars grow, they become like concrete, which create what's called contractures or tightening that restricted his movement unless relieved by operations and painful physical therapy. He had contractures on his joints, including on his fingers and elbows, as well as on his armpit and neck, which pulled his head down toward his chest. His spine had become curved by the scar contractures on the front of his body, slouching him over and making his breathing difficult, and he walked in a shuffle because of restrictions on his knees. That meant regular activities like getting out of bed, walking, raising his arm, and just standing up straight would cause the skin to rub or break off, causing open wounds that persisted throughout his life, as the thin skin grafts did not grow at the same rate as Robert himself. Robert's acute hospitalization period, that stretch of time he never left, was about 5 months between June 1998 and Thanksgiving in November, when he was released for a day to spend with his family. He then returned for regular operations to cover the areas that had rubbed off and to relieve the tightness until doctors detected cancer in his open sores. He had an occupational therapist because he struggled to do daily activities, had a physical therapist because he had difficulty walking, and had a psychiatrist and psychologist as he suffered from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Robert was exhibiting the typical signs of people who suffer big injuries, fear and fright, which were managed by anti-anxiety medication Ativan. He had night terrors and sweats every day. He was shaking, hallucinating, had flashbacks about the injury that startled him awake, and was disoriented. In this state, he told his mom outlandish stories about what happened to him, including that his grandma poured coffee on him and set him on fire, and that the dog slammed the door and he exploded. Eventually, doctors were able to taper off the morphine and Ativan, and he started making improvements, including being able to carry good conversations with a sound mind. Things were looking up for the kid dubbed in the media as the burned boy. No one on earth gave him a chance to survive the night, much less for days and months, and a suspect in his attack was finally behind bars. 4 days after the incident, a Montgomery County judge signed a warrant for a juvenile detention of Donald Wilburn Collins on July 2nd. The same day, Robert identified the 13-year-old from his hospital bed as the person he and investigators believed was the one to burn him. Robert's identification, which was faxed to detectives as witness statements from Colleen and the nurses who heard it, was one of two justifications for probable cause, the other being the fact that Donald was the Middleton's neighbor and Robert knew him. The number one theory for motive at the time was simply that Robert refused to share his fireworks with Donald. At approximately 12:30 p.m. that Thursday, July 2nd, Donald and his stepfather were on the road with packed bags when they were stopped by police and told that he had a detention warrant on suspicion of injury to a child, arson, and aggravated assault. It was a day that everyone in the nation seemed hungry for, and news cameras were there to feed. The controversial images of a handcuffed juvenile being loaded into a vehicle, pleading that he didn't do it, and then being whisked away were broadcast to American televisions in prime time. Donald was taken to a judge to have his rights read to him, and then was later subjected to a 2.5-hour grilling by detectives in a room at the sheriff's office beginning at around 2 p.m. The interrogation was described as aggressive and high pressure in a bad cop style. At the end of the interrogation, Donald agreed to provide a statement that implicated himself in the crime. On June 28, 1998, I went to Robbie's house at around noon and played for a little while. About 2 hours later, Bobby Middleton told me to go home because Clint Middleton was being rude and I told him to shut up. I went home and I ate a salami sandwich. Before I left Robbie's house, I heard Robbie ask if he can go to Annalverdo's house. When I finished eating, I went down the trail where I met Annalverdo past the barn. Annalverdo asked me if I wanted to go have some fun and I said yeah. Annalverdo took me to the barn and showed me a gas can. The gas can was red plastic with a yellow plastic spout and had about 2 inches of gas in it. I grabbed the gas can and Annalverdo picked up the matches which were laying on top of the gas can. Annalverdo said, "Let's burn a tree," and I agreed. We walked over to a small tree and I poured gas at the bottom of the tree. I poured half of the gas out of the can onto the ground by the tree and stepped back towards a barn when I saw Robbie walking up the trail towards me and Annalverdo. I threw the gas and some landed on the tree and some landed on the center of Robbie's face. Robbie stopped where we poured all of the gas on the ground and said, "What are you doing?" And then Annalverdo threw a lit match which hit Robbie in the face, at which time Robbie caught on fire. Robbie grabbed the tree real quick, which also caught on fire, and then began running towards his house down the trail. Me and Annalverdo then turned and ran in the opposite direction down the trail. I was carrying the matches and Annalverdo was carrying the gas can. We hid the gas can in the woods and then Annalverdo went to his house and I went back to my house. As I came out of the woods, Robbie was sitting in the ditch. I asked Robbie what happened, and he said, "I got burned." Donald then went to get help. Following the interrogation, the court held Donald in detention based on this statement and for his safety, as he was getting death threats from the community. Donald languished at the detention center for 6 months until he was released with conditions in January 1999, as Chief Juvenile Prosecutor William Patillo worked on securing probable cause evidence to put forward to a grand jury. And he wasn't working with much. Not only did Patillo think Donald's statement wasn't enough, he didn't think it was good at all. Patillo was cognizant that appellate courts at the time began focusing on the process by which police obtained juvenile confessions. One of the conditions of the Texas Family Code was to ensure that those statements were taken in rooms designated as Juvenile Processing Offices, or JPOs. The policy rationale was that juveniles cannot reasonably be expected to give an uncoerced statement while being exposed to adult inmates, similar to how juveniles cannot be exposed to interrogators with guns, so there needed to be dedicated rooms that were approved by the Juvenile Board. When Patillo called the interrogating officers to ask whether Donald's interview was taken in a designated JPO, they did not know, and neither did the director of probation. No such list of designated offices existed in the county at the time, which would only later be rectified because of this case. There was also some uncertainty surrounding the statement itself. It came at the end of a long and hard interrogation, and despite signing off on it, Donald's statement was not written by him, but by an interrogating officer because the boy said he could not write. Donald, who was found to have poor reading skills and low intellectual functioning, didn't even know Analverdo's name, only referring to him as the Mexican kid in the audio tape, yet the interrogating officer filled the name in for him. And even without all of that, Donald did not take the blame for setting the fire and, in fact, conveyed that his role was purely accidental. Those factors could have, by themselves, called into question the statement's admissibility in court, but it was also the surrounding context that watered the seed of doubt in Patillo's mind. There was no physical evidence backing the statement. They found nothing on Donald that would suggest he was playing with fire or gas, and the search for the gas can, which included the use of divers, helicopter flyovers, and even Donald agreeing after his statement to go back to the scene in search of it, yielded nothing. Additionally, 2 female inmates who spoke with Donald early on in his stay at the juvenile detention center said Donald implicated himself in the crime, but that it was his uncle, in this case his guardian, who forced him to do it, which contradicted his statement to investigators. If the prosecutor was to accept the inmate statements as credible, then not only was an adult involved, but Donald was under duress during the commission of the crime. Finally, Colleen had asked Robert a leading question: "Did Don do this to you?" instead of the open-ended question, "Who did this to you?" Taken with the fact that he outed Rex to begin with, the concern was whether Robert, a child, was simply trying to please an authority figure, i.e. his mother, and answer the question as it was suggested, or that he was unable, in his condition, to guard his memory from outside information. Sometime in or around the summer of 2000, Patillo and 2 detectives went to visit Robert at his home to see if his condition improved enough to get a clearer narrative about what happened. Before they went down there, Patillo testified that he received secondhand information that Robert's doctors and psychiatrists said the boy's psychological development regressed because of the trauma, and that it was not uncommon for someone to lose memory in and around the event because of that. But they needed to take their chances. When they got there, Robert was extremely fragile, so they were cognizant not to stress him. During the conversation about who did this, Robert fired off 5 or 6 different names including Donald, but he added no additional context. Because I couldn't get any details out of him, and because that was the first time that I'd heard him say it, I didn't know if it was something that he adopted from what somebody else said, or he had memory of it at the time, Patillo said in testimony about him outing Donald. Just that statement sitting by itself with nothing to back it up, I didn't know how much weight a trier of fact would put on that statement. With everything he had in front of him, Patillo said he did not believe his office had enough solid evidence to form the foundation of probable cause to convince a grand jury, which has the ability to question and ask for more evidence, to indict Donald Collins in such a high-profile case. But he did not let that dim his optimism too much. He told Colleen that they believed an adult was involved in at least covering up the crime, that they felt there would be more evidence emerging that would allow them to prosecute Donald Collins, and that there was always a chance that with more counseling, psychiatric help, and time, Robert would eventually be able to articulate what really happened on that summer day in 1998. In July 2000, a year and a half after his release, the court dropped the charges against Donald Collins after the county filed a motion stating it no longer wished to pursue them. Then came silence. 1, 2, 3, 4 years of no new, groundbreaking evidence until Patillo resigned as chief juvenile prosecutor in April 2004 without receiving definitive information about who burned Robert and why. The case of the burned boy, once a media lightning rod, had gone cold. As if etched in his mind, Thomas Duroy was quick to recall the date during trial. It was Friday, May 6, 2011, exactly 1 week after Robert Middleton succumbed to cancer, when he heard the voice of Mark Brumberger. The assistant county attorney had seen Robert's videotaped deposition, in which the young man recounted what happened before the attack, and wanted Thomas to take a look. He requested that we pull the file, review it, and determine if something was missed, Thomas recalled in court about the reopening of the Middleton file. Thomas was one of 2 detectives in the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department's Cold Case Squad, and was the first to get the nod when it was created in 2006. This cold case unit had unique advantages. dedicated detectives assigned to just those types of files, and access to private DNA labs. The last work on the Middleton file was done in December 1998, so they had their work cut out for them, and that concern was independent of the problems the squad will discover with the original investigation, detectives not being called out until the day after the incident, and then neglecting to interview or try to interview everyone there. This can be okay because sometimes you can rely on forensics to save an otherwise botched investigation. So while the sheriff's office did not have access to touch or skin cell DNA testing back in 1998, that technology improved by 2006 and most certainly by 2011. Theoretically then, all the cold case detectives had to do was haul the evidence over from the crime lab, get some swabs, match it to one or more of the suspects, and, with some circumstantial evidence mixed in, the rest could be considered water under the bridge. All made easier because the one suspect they always had in mind, Donald Collins, was required to submit his DNA in an unrelated case in November 2001. But as Detective Duroy would discover, just about everything in this case was extraordinary, because despite improvements in DNA technology from 98 to 2006, one thing did not change, and that's Robert's condition. Robert was still alive, which meant the case was still categorized as an aggravated assault, which meant it was subject to the law's 3-year limitations period, which exposed another problem with the sheriff's office, a lack of communication between what's called the Criminal Investigations Division, headed by Detective Zener, and the crime lab, which held perhaps the most consequential pieces of evidence collected that summer day. By way of background, the crime lab and the fire marshal's office each held separate pieces of evidence in this case. The fire marshal held items including that black hose with a metal fitting on the end, soil samples, and clothing from Robert, Rex, and Donald. The crime lab held the 2 pieces of burned metal believed to be part of a boat fuel gauge assembly with a screw cap, the plastic orange juice jug with unidentified liquid in it, which could have been tested, the blue fire-damaged Bic lighter, whose serrated strike wheel would have collected skin cells that could have been a great source of touch DNA if tested, and 2 cigarette butts whose filters could have been a source for DNA collection, considering Donald was known to be a smoker. Collected from the compound in which Donald was living was more of the teen's clothing, and in a shed on the property was a red and yellow 2.5-gallon plastic gas can with a spout collected via a search warrant, on which touch DNA could have been performed. Could have tested, would have tested, should have tested. The crime lab destroyed the evidence on September 8, 2006, following a court order signed by a judge the week before. Infrastructure changes at the sheriff's office coincided with a review of cases that went past the law of limitations. A property clerk looked at the Middleton case, saw that the statute had run out on the aggravated assault, and put the evidence on a blanket order to be destroyed. Detective Zener said he did not even have direct knowledge of the blanket order, blaming the gaffe on a lack of communication with the crime lab for which he accepted responsibility because he ran the show. Detective Duroy did, however, note in testimony that he was aware of a conversation between Detective Zener and the director of the crime lab about maintaining this evidence, but it still made it on the destruction list. I hate to say this is not uncommon in cold cases, Detective Duroy testified. This happens a lot with evidence and document retention. You acknowledge it, you address it, but then you move on. You do whatever you can do on the case. It happens more often than I would like to happen, but it does. Otherwise, Detective Duroy was able to collect the evidence that was preserved by the fire marshal after the case was reopened, which proved nothing because testing on those items didn't reveal anything. Now, not only were there no eyewitnesses to the attack, but also no physical or forensic evidence pointing to their prime suspect. The entirety of the reinvestigation would then center on witness statements from people who were there and still alive. Some people in the neighborhood had since passed away, but investigators were able to make some headway with others. Possibly more than 1,000 hours of investigative work went into the Middleton case, 6 whole months dedicated to just this one investigation, and 115 people were interviewed, 30 of which were new accounts. There were 3 people of interest from the beginning of this investigation: Ann Alverdo, the kid Robert was supposed to meet, Rex, the kid Robert blamed, and Donald, also the kid Robert blamed, who kept a piece of Robert's burned clothing and could not stop talking to the media. Adalberto's version of the story as an adult remained the same as it was when he was a child, and he was comfortably ruled out. Rex was alibied through multiple interviews, past and present, with Scoggin family members in the swim group, and through body language analysis and the alignment of stories, investigators believe the family members, who adored Robert, would never cover for a person who would hurt the little boy described by his father as a bit of a ladies' man who got along with everybody and didn't have a mean bone in his body. Throughout the investigation, Donald's name kept coming up despite the lack of hard evidence. While some of his clothing came back negative for gas, others weren't even collected, such as the t-shirt, blue jeans, and tennis shoes he was wearing here in this photo with police, who did not report smelling gas on him. Investigators already had a motive. They just needed some convincing witness statements to back it up. And they would get some help from a source that was once a thorn in the side of the first investigation: the media.
A Montgomery County family has been awarded the biggest settlement ever.
7 months into this new criminal investigation, in December 2011, the media were reporting the verdict reached by a Fayette County jury in the civil case against Donald Collins, whose side did not show up for trial. Craig Seco's evidence included testimony from an officer at the scene, depositions from 3 doctors, and Robert's dying declaration, which revealed why he believed he was burned. The jury awarded both Middleton parents $60 million in actual damages, $250 million to Robert's estate, and $150 billion in punitive damages, at the time the largest in history, albeit symbolic, as none of that was ever expected to be paid out, which again was not the point. It was more of a statement of outrage at the lack of action and justice for a boy who captured hearts in the nation, and a statement projected to millions of Americans through their screens that would draw more witnesses. Not just any though, but real victims of Donald Wilburn Collins.
Let's go off the record for just a minute.
Going off the record at 12:20 p.m.
Craig Seco needed to buy some time before he could do this deposition. He had been in an unrelated trial in March 2011 and was required by law to send a notice and therefore give an opportunity for Donald Collins to cross-examine Robert. Robert had expressed concern about Donald being at his bedside, but that was not going to happen because the man believed to have burned him 12 years earlier was serving time in jail on a seemingly unrelated matter. That will matter later. Donald wasn't quite 7 years old when Colleen first met the boy, which would have been around the time the Middletons first moved to the home on Crossnoe. He was over at my house playing, and I asked him, I said, "You want to stay and eat lunch?" And he said, "My mom told me that if I'm hungry to go to the neighbor's house." I thought, well, he's an odd little duck, but I like that about children. So I was actually happy to meet him in the beginning, Colleen said. Donald kind of moped around aimlessly in the neighborhood. His father was in and out of jail, his mother would eventually pass away when he was 8 years old, and he'd been living with his maternal aunt and her husband, sleeping on the couch in the compound adjacent to the Middleton home. I inherited him, his guardian John said. I did my very best, put him in school every day. The Middletons, like others in the neighborhood, kept their distance from Donald's family because they were scared of them. According to Colleen, Donald had no friends in part because he was a big bully who apparently had a thing for threatening people. Robert's sister testified that about 2 weeks before the burning, he killed one of her kittens because she didn't come outside to play with him. In the 2 weeks leading to the burning, Colleen said she believed Donald was stalking her little boy. In that space of time, Robert would come home every day that summer and tell her that he saw Donald, which was weird to her because she said she did not see him that often. She recounts one of those days in testimony. Robbie and I went outside together and I wasn't even thinking about it. I just happened to go on one side of the shed we had, and Robbie went on the other side where there was nothing but bushes. It was by the fence line between our 2 houses, and I didn't think anything about it. I just walked around the side of the shed and there was Don and Robbie. And just as soon as Don saw me, he started walking off. So I said, "Don," and he kept walking like he didn't hear me. So I said, "Robbie, "You know I don't want you hanging around with him." And Robbie said, "It's okay, Mama, he's being nice." But I was terrified. I was thinking, why is he out here being nice to my son, and he doesn't want me to know about it? Because nice is a good thing. But Colleen knew Donald was up to no good. It only took a second encounter with the kid to decide she did not want him on her yard or near her children. The second time I met him, I was outside cleaning the yard and he and my daughter were sitting in a car pretending to drive, Colleen recalled. And Heather started screaming bloody murder. Dawn knew I was only standing a few feet away, so I looked up and I couldn't see through the back windshield of the car. So I walked around, and when I opened the door, I literally had to pull him off my daughter. I said, "Heather, what happened?" She said he was trying to pull my panties down. So I looked at Don and he just started walking off. So naturally, I was thinking, what on earth is going on at the house next door with kids this bad? She would get the hint a couple of years later. Donald's sister came over to the Middleton house laughing. She said, "I saw Don and another boy doing it in the ditch," Colleen recounted the girl saying. I was horrified, so I instantly ran outside and was looking for the other little boy that she named, and I found him. And he said nothing happened. It wasn't him. But his sister knew her own brother. She knew her brother was doing somebody in the ditch. His sister was still laughing. She said, "Well, boys will be boys." Colleen said she didn't tell the police about these incidents because she feared retribution from the Collins family. Instead, she instructed Robert that if he ever saw Donald in the woods, that he needed to run away. She told him that every single day, except the day of the burning. In the years since, Robert had consistently pointed the finger at Donald with no outside influence on his thought process, according to Colleen. Every once in a while, Robert would mention something about it, she said, about those early days. The first time she actually heard him say Donald's name was when he was doing physical therapy just before his 9th birthday. She said he was crying from the pain and would repeat, "Why did Don do this to me?" It was not until the summer of 2009 when he would finally open up about the why for the first time. Robert and his sister Heather were sitting at the kitchen table of his trailer on their parents' property, just listening to music one night when he confided in her about what happened 2 weeks before the attack. She said he was too embarrassed to tell anybody else, including his mother. What Robert didn't know was that his sister had already told their mom before she was asked to step out for this part of the deposition.
We are back on the record at 12:25 p.m.
Ms. Heather Middleton, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you'll give or translate will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, Robert, are you ready to continue? Yes?
Mm.
Okay, I know you're tired and we're going to try and get through this. There's a reason I asked your mother to step out, and that's this. I want to know whether or not Donald Collins or anybody he was related to ever assaulted you in any way. Did Donald Collins assault you before your 8th birthday?
He hit me a few times before.
He hit you a few times? Did he ever sexually assault you?
Yeah,
How many times?
just once.
How long before this accident did that take place?
Like 2 weeks.
2 weeks? What did Donald Collins do to you that sexually assaulted you 2 weeks
He
before?
took me out to the woods where I was burned. Not yet, though.
He took you out to the woods where you were burned and did what?
Not as before I got burned.
It was the same place, though?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you were at that location, what did he do?
He tore my clothes down and started raping me.
He pulled your clothes down and started raping you? Is that right?
Yeah.
Colleen would have already suspected it. In a written statement to police on July 1st, 1998, she recounted that approximately 10 days before the burning, Robert told her that he was in the woods when Donald asked the boy to show him his butt. She said he was upset by it and didn't say anything beyond that, but it is possible that the assault happened right there.
Why did you not tell anybody at that time when you were 7 years old that Donald Collins had raped you?
He told me not to tell anyone. I'm not afraid that he was going to hurt me. So he didn't.
He told you not to tell anyone or he'd hurt you?
Yeah.
he might have been more comfortable opening up to his sister after she told him about her own experience at the hands of the neighborhood bully. Colleen and Heather said they did not know what to do with the information, considering the case's closed status at the time, but if anything were to come out of it, they knew it would have to come from Robert. Robert was the one who wanted to speak with Ken Bigham because he wanted to find out what happened with the investigation, said his sister. Robert and I informed Ken about the sexual assault allegation, she said. Robert affirmed it. Ken told me that he told Craig Seco about it. Craig thought it made perfect sense that morning in bed. Burning a child over stolen smoke bombs was too extreme, but doing so to keep him silent about a sexual assault wasn't. Following the deposition, Craig passed on Robert's statement to the county attorney, who then ordered the case's reopening. During an interview in March 2013, Colleen for the first time remembered and told cold case detectives that she had seen a Heather W. among the people on the road after Robert was burned. Heather, who was 13 and visiting the area at the time, was the relative of Donald who testified that she heard the teen shouting to come help because Robert's hair was on fire. Heather was one of the people the original investigation missed back in 1998, and her testimony would prove significant. She testified that she had to sleep on the same couch as Donald because they had nowhere else to. Donald, who was having trouble sleeping on the other end, was asked if he was okay, to which he said he needed to tell her something. He and Rex had tied Robert to a tree. Rex had thrown gasoline on him, and Donald was the one to throw the match because they had molested him and wanted to keep him quiet. Heather said she went to one of the adults in the family with the information, to which they told her they would take care of it. That meant never letting Heather speak to police and not allowing her to be around media when they came to the neighborhood. She also said she tried contacting the Middletons about the story when she was older, but was unable to reach them. In her 2015 testimony, Heather said she had removed herself from the family because they, allegedly, were molesting her. Cold case detectives also spoke with Sandra, who was 12 in the summer of '98. She had given a written statement to police back during the original investigation, which was based on something Donald told her, but didn't say anything that would implicate the boy in the crime, just that he was there when Robert was burned. She would add to that story in 2013. She told detectives that, mere days after the fact and before his arrest in July 1998, Donald said at a birthday party that he had done it. He had tied Robert up and burned him. Asked why she didn't disclose this back then, she said she was scared of the boy's family. Sandra said another girl named Renee, who was 7 years old at the time, heard this conversation, but she was never mentioned to police during the original investigation. Renee later confirmed that she heard talk about Donald tying Robert to a tree and burning him. All of this information, which shocked Detective Zener, completely eluded the original investigation, with the result being no closure in Robert's case and a dangerous juvenile on the loose. Donald was staying at a relative's house in the summer of 2001, 1 year after the charges against him in the Middleton case were dropped. According to testimony, the now 16-year-old had no place to go, and the family of 8-year-old R.M., who will remain anonymous for this telling, was going to try to adopt the once suspect in the Middleton burning. R.M. knew Donald his entire life. He alleged that the older boy would try to give him cigarettes because the big kid was allowed to do whatever he wanted. And while he looked up to Donald and played with him because he didn't have a brother, R.M. always viewed him as a bully. In the middle of August 2001, R.M. recalled that he and Donald were in a room playing for at least 45 minutes. In that space of time, the course of his life changed. For 2 days afterward, R.M. began exhibiting strange behavior that his mother noticed. He was more reserved, and he would go to school and not do anything. I tried to hide it, but my mother done told me she knew what happened, that he done told her, and she tricked me, R.M. said in testimony in 2015, referring to his mom's way of extracting information. Yes, I did tell my mother, and they took me to Texas Children's Hospital for the investigation. Don had penetrated R.M. from behind and forced his organ into his mouth, according to the November 2001 judgment. Don told me if I was to say anything, he would burn me like that other boy, R.M. testified in 2015, And he had a gun that night. I can't tell you if it was a water gun or play gun. I was a kid. I was scared he would kill me. I probably would never told anyone had my mom not forced it out of me. Cold case detectives were told about RM's story by his grandmother, who was the sister of Donald's mother. When they searched police reports and RM's forensic interview concerning his case, they did not find any mention of a burning threat, which meant no link to the Middleton case. Colleen's statement about Donald wanting to see Robert's butt appeared tenuous in relation. In the November 2001 judgment, which required Donald to provide a DNA sample, the court wrote that because the teen cannot be provided the quality of care and level of support and supervision that the child needs to meet the conditions of probation, and the school system has exhausted every available resource and can no longer provide the educational and psychological needs of the child, the court finds the child and the protection of the public will be best served by committing the child to the care, custody, and control of the Texas Youth Commission. He was ordered to be held there for a time not beyond his 21st birthday, and was required to register as a sex offender wherever he went. According to the Correctional Care System records, he had been held in custody until April 2006 and was discharged to the Harmony House shelter in Houston. The next year, Donald pled guilty to a charge of theft for stealing beer and a stereo from a Walmart in Montgomery County and was given 45 days in jail. He was convicted in May 2009 for failing to register as a sex offender when he moved to San Jacinto County and was given 14 months in jail. It was in that summer that Robert first came forward to his sister about the assault allegation. In October 2010, he was again convicted of failing to register as a sex offender, this time in Liberty County, for which he was given 2 years. It was during this time that Robert would give that deposition that Donald could not attend. Finally, the same cold case detectives working to put Donald away discovered he failed to register in San Jacinto County again, for which he was charged in 2013. That case was still pending when, in March 2014, a court greenlit the transfer of 29-year-old Donald Collins from juvenile to adult court to face a grand jury-approved charge of capital murder for the death of Robert Middleton. Emotional evidence, tragic evidence, miraculous evidence, and no actual evidence. That was how defense attorney Tay Bond described the state's case against his client, Donald Collins, at the man's February 2015 trial, which was moved to Galveston County for fairness. The graphic images of a boy burned, blackened, the creases of his hospital bedsheet collecting blood after incisions were made to let him breathe easier, were a smokescreen for a case that stands atop a failed investigation, he conveyed. A glaring fault being the destroyed evidence in 2006 that could have actually proved exculpatory for his side. Whatever evidence left over after the destruction order does not point to Donald. No physical, no forensic, no eyewitness evidence. It's all just rumor, innuendo, and hearsay, he continued. How convenient that the statements corroborating the sexual assault and threats of burning came after the civil suit was heavily publicized, which otherwise have no basis in evidence, the defense attorney went on. Outside of the doctor's opinion, what proof is there that this squamous cell carcinoma came from the burn injury, especially considering it's extremely rare for a teen to get it from such an injury, and far more common to get it from the sun? How could we look away from the fact that Robert first outed Rex, especially considering this type of outcry is made when a victim seeks to out his attacker before his expected death? The name Rex also came in response to an open-ended question from his mother. Robert, who did this to you? Yet his client is whisked away by police, paraded like a sacrificial lamb in front of media vultures in 1998 on a probable cause detention warrant based on a yes answer to his mother's leading question. Did Dawn do this to you? It's possible that suggesting something to a child becomes part of their memory, and children want to please authority figures. In this case, his mother, Detective Duroy, acknowledged in testimony. You don't always have the ability to guard your memory from outside information, he continued. So people can wind up telling you things that they believe to be true in their mind, they absolutely believe it, and it may not, in fact, be accurate. You're telling the truth based on what your understanding is. It was ultimately a botched investigation that allowed some 24 hours for a group to alibi Rex because detectives weren't called to the scene that night, the defense argued. For the state, this was a case about connecting the dots. Donald's guardian testified that he had been hanging out with a friend at the shed on his property when Donald asked for that fishing line he promised the boy. It is believed that this line could have been used to tie Robert to the tree. That would have been one piece of evidence had it been available among many that could have been tested. But would it have really mattered? For all the fuss about evidence being destroyed, the items found at the scene were ones that were laying around sheds and boats that could have been handled by anyone. So any prospective DNA tests would have revealed who touched the items in the past, and Donald was known to mow the lawn using a gas-powered mower. Moreover, Donald said there was a match, not a lighter, involved in setting the gas alight, and it was known that adults and kids smoked in the woods, so testing the cigarette butts and wrappers before they were destroyed wouldn't have necessarily revealed anything related to the crime. In fact, it's typical in situations where you do have items that are known to have been touched by multiple people, or presumably touched by multiple people, that police will forego DNA analysis if it's not going to be particularly useful in its result, Detective Duroy testified. Otherwise, the state posited that the witness testimony was overwhelming. And this is in part because Donald could not keep quiet about it while in juvenile detention, according to testimony from 8 inmates who were in the facility with him during those early days, and who spoke to cold case detectives. Several of those inmates were still serving prison time when they testified at the risk of obtaining snitch status, although they were promised a good word from the state at their parole hearings. Some said they didn't come forward at the time because they were either focused on their own charges, they thought the police already knew, or they just didn't want to help the police at all. Some of these inmates would bully Donald, spit on him, slap and punch him. In response, they said he would get furious and threaten to burn them like he did Robert. Burned him real good was allegedly one way Donald put it to one inmate. He was boastful, proud, remorseless, and would chuckle when he recalled the burning incident, some alleged. When you walked by, he would shoot you a finger, spit out the window, and laughed, recalled another. His subsequent failure to register as a sex offender 3 separate times led prosecutors to believe this wasn't forgetfulness, but a purposeful decision to continue preying on unsuspecting people. Donald Collins, it is documented in the evidence, had sexually assaulted 3 people, including Renee, the girl who overheard Donald say at the birthday party that he burned Robert. She told cold case detectives that a year earlier, when she was 6 years old, Donald got close to her and started touching her privates late one night in the pool in the presence of 2 older females. She did not report this to police. For RM, the impact of his experience was significant. He testified that he went from a straight A student to C's and D's and wasn't able to complete school, instead taking up work from the age of 14. He had developed anger issues that required management classes, and despite that, he raised a family with 2 kids at the time of his 2015 testimony. Had it not been for Colleen's quick reaction, Donald would have made her daughter Heather the 4th documented case. And had it not been for Robert's dying testimony, a redacted version of which was used as a witness in the 2015 trial, the reign of terror may have continued for the man who bullied inmates, threatened a jailer, and called himself the King of the Pod after his return to a frequent stomping ground on his last failure to register charge. By not registering, by choosing not to register, by not wanting to register, he's telling the people, he's telling the kids in that community that he doesn't want them to know who he is or what he is, the state argued. That way, moms and dads and little kids running around are not put on notice that they have that lurking out there. That thing was another way the prosecution referred to Donald. Murderer, child rapist, monster, and despicable excuse of a human were some others. In February 2015, a unanimous jury found Donald guilty of at least one of those descriptors. Murderer. The defense pleaded for the jury to consider leniency on sentencing because he was a wayward child with little to no adult guidance or positive role models. Otherwise, there was no mitigation evidence. Donald's defense team said they spoke to his sister, his biological father, and a mitigation expert about testifying during the punishment hearing. The mitigation expert said she would not be helpful, and the defense opted not to call his father and sister for the same reason. Considering his age at the time of the crime, Donald was subject to the 1998 sentencing guideline for juveniles charged with first-degree felonies, which is called a determinate sentence of between 3 and 40 years. The jury was uncompromising. Donald got every one of those 40 years. During a suppression hearing the month before the Capitol murder trial, a judge ruled that Donald's interrogation statement on July 2, 1998 was inadmissible for failure to follow all the rules of the family code, which proved that then juvenile prosecutor William Patillo was correct. The courts also believed that had the county obtained Heather W.'s statement about what Donald told her from the couch on the night of the incident, it would have significantly improved their case against him while he was still a juvenile. And if that statement was available in 1998, could it have helped police catch the third person believed to be on the trail? The accepted evidence that led to the conviction includes testimony that there was someone else with them, which the state accepts.
Was there anyone else there?
Not that I saw.
Could you hear anything?
Yes, I heard it sound like another person with him.
Could you tell if that person was an older person or a younger person?
Older.
Did it sound like an adult?
Yes.
The answer to the question of who else was on the trail will likely remain unknown in part because of the mistakes made in the investigation. In the aftermath of the burning, Detective Zener said the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office overhauled its processes. Aside from being a big learning experience, Detective Zener said his office started focusing on specialization instead of generalization and reduced monthly caseloads. They also instituted peer reviews to catch any slip-ups and improve the line of communication between the Criminal Investigations Division and the Crime Lab. Just about every case I've been involved in, when you look back when it's over, there's things that should have been done and could have been done, reflected Detective Zener. So in that way, it can be said that Robert's death improved the system. But ask anyone, and his impact went way beyond that. It's like a piece of me is missing, his sister Heather said of her best friend. It's a big, empty, black hole that nothing else can fill because Robert is gone. He was everything to me. If you were having a bad day, he made your day better by his demeanor, said Rebecca Whitlock, who was a personal trainer at Shriners Wellness Center. Rebecca said Robert became her friend in September 2007 when he came to do the extremely painful physical therapy. Despite his hardship, Robert was an advocate for other children and families at Shriners. He encouraged them to do their exercises, be proactive, and to push through because they still have life, she recalled. Because the hospital received many patients from outside the country, he would set up fundraising booths in front of Walmart to pay for their transportation costs. On what would have been his 21st birthday, Rebecca declared on June 28, 2011, Robert Ray $20 Middleton Day, a fundraiser for the Galveston Family Transportation Fund, based on a sort of inside joke between the two because she said Robert would always ask her for $20.
He'd always shrug up against you and say, hey, you got $20.
Through to the end, Robert, who expressed fear of going to hell and lived the rest of his life doing good, was described as a hero to the children of Shriners, the doctors and staff, and to all the likely victims of Donald Collins had he not, as his final act, brought about the day of reckoning. I wish to God I could have hugged that kid. I bet you did too, don't you? The state asked the jury. He has and will continue to serve as an inspiration for all walks of life. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, detectives, people coming here, other burned victims, yourselves. Something had to come out of this nightmare that was good. It had to be worth something. And it was Robert Middleton, the state continued. After so many nights of missed sleep, after so many tears, after so much pain, after so much frustration with the system, today, that little boy gets to hit back. Today, that little boy, through you, gets to say, I'm bigger than you, I'm better than you, I am more righteous than you, and I'm stronger than you. And for what you did to me, today is the day that you pay.
I want to thank you. I know this has not been easy. At this time, I'm going to pass a witness, and we'll close the record.
This will conclude the deposition at 12:31 p.m.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story, which is based on the primary sources. Special mention must go to the record staff and the court reporter for their assistance, and to you guys for engaging in the subject matter. I hope you're well, you're engaging in acts of charity, and I'll see you next time. Good night.